In the craft of compassion, I tell the story of this man who was dying, really, of pancreatic cancer. And we're conversing, and he's talking about, he was involved in the Manhattan Project, the development of the first atomic bomb. And my first book, Dreaming the End of the World, I had 3 or 4 chapters on the Manhattan Project. And my first conversation, I'm taking his vital signs, we're just chatting. He's a charming fellow, you know. And I'm wanting to milk him for the gossip about Oppenheimer and Teller and Szilard and, you know, whatever, the posse, right?
Yeah.
And then I went out into the hallway to tend to my other patients, and I realized I felt like I had been seduced. I'd been self-seduced by his charm, and I was angry. He was a chemist, and he finally approached them at the Manhattan Project. I'm a chemist, what am I doing here? I'm not a physicist. They sent him to Tennessee, where he worked on biological weapons. That's what he did the rest of his career.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mass destruction by way of bioproducts.
Totally.
And this was his life, his
that
calling.
was his life. And now he was dying.
And now you had loathing.
Oh, I had total
Disgust, loathing. This
completely. I didn't care whether he died or not, you know? And at 3 or 4 in the morning, he called me in. He was in excruciating pain, and he woke up in a panic because he said he knew he was going to die. And I turned around, I said, I'll be right back. I went and got some morphine, and I sat with him for probably half an hour. I injected the morphine into his IV line.
At his request?
Oh, yeah. And I saw him over to his sleep. And it was basically, I said, my opinion, you know, is not really relevant here. This is a man who woke up terrified of his life being swallowed by the abyss, which it will be. He was seriously terminal with pancreatic cancer, and pancreatic cancer can be merciless. And I realized my opinion's really not relevant. I mean, really. And, you know, I mean, as I wrote in The Craft of Compassion, I would just as soon he'd be slinging tofu burgers rather than, you know, working on biological weapons for a living for decades. Nonetheless, this is a man at the edge of the end of his life, and it was remarkable. It really shifted things in me. That was the gift of that particular moment. It's like we do not choose who is worthy of compassion. You know?
We don't get to judge that.
Yeah, we don't.
We get to extend compassion without judgment.
Exactly.
Oh,
Precisely.
That's a curiosity to me.
Yeah, quite.
I'm not ready to relinquish my rage at harm caused by harming people.
Of course.
And yet here is someone's in your moment needs you to give them peace.
Oh, yeah.
It's a challenge.
Totally. Exactly.
In your craft of compassion, you move us to the 3rd step. And it is deeper, less about self-giving compassion.
Yeah.
What is that 3rd step?
Well, the 3rd step is, I call it radical empathy, and it's my translation of a Tibetan word, Dekchen Yamje, which is usually translated as equalizing and exchanging self and other. And it's really a fascinating transitional thing, because in step 2, one can talk about me and my compassion. But Dekchen Yamje, it's sliding a little bit, where one's seeing things through the eyes of the other. You know, it's like the Cherokee proverb, you can only understand another if you have walked 3 moons in their moccasins.
Okay.
you know, you know, I mean, for example, with this fellow who had been involved in biological weapons, there was, I could come with him with all manner of judgment, but if I looked at things through his eyes, he was dying. He had lived the life, done the work he had done, and he was going to die with that. And it was terrifying. And to extend, you know, I tell the story of Armando, who was this 15-year-old guy. You know, he was on oncology ward. I mean, he was a patient's son. His mother was dying of liver cancer. She did die that night.
Oh dear.
Had a large Mexican family around him. And I'm passing, very busy. And I'm seeing him weeping. She's not my patient. I'm seeing him weeping in the hallway. And I don't have time to tend to him. And beyond that, he was pushing my buttons. I was punked on when I was 12, 13 by pachucos like this guy. I mean, that's how I was imagining him.
This was like vile, irritated, angry energy inside of you.
Yeah.
And this guy's pulling on it because wasn't he just like being destructive and disruptive and disrespectful?
He had taken some paper towel and stuffed up the public sink and ran water in it and flooded the bathroom. I mean, he was acting out. And he was a kid who was out of his mind with grief. His mother was dying there.
Painfully, slow.
I knew I had to come in and do something. I was scared. I mean, I didn't know how I would be, you know. But I knew I had to stand between. This kid was profoundly vulnerable. And I went in and I just introduced myself to the family and I said, Armando, did you flood the bathroom? And he kind of looked down. He said, yeah. I said, you're not a bad person, are you? He said, no. You're not going to cause any more trouble, eh? I said, no, I won't. And I said, is it that you have too many feelings, that you can't bear them? And he said that was the case. And I said, you know, my father died when I was like a few years older than you, and I couldn't bear it either, and I acted out. They called security. They're going to be here in a moment, and I'll send them on their way. And then I looked at the family. I said, take care of him. His heart is breaking. That is radical empathy. I dropped my shtick, like with the guy who was involved in weapons of mass destruction, and I saw it through this kid's eyes. He was watching his mother die. And I
wanted to protest with anger at his loss.
Oh.
And you got to his heart.
Of course. And I know that he would never forget that interaction, ever. That was going to be with him to the end of his life. That's as those who were kind with me when my father died.
So radical empathy.
Yeah.
Then you transition to
the mysterium.